beautiful Sunday morning to you guys. As I've been drinking my cup of cozy, I've been sitting and thinking, what do flying cars, 3D televisions, and VR rigs all have in common? Now, I mean, the obvious answer is that they're all the future, but I think that the more practical one is that they're all expensive. But do they have to be? Well, AMD says no. That might have been a little excessive. They make this claim because of the 480. This is the Sapphire Nitro 480 8GB, which is a mouthful, but not a wallet full. Now, as a modder, I want my graphics cards to, of course, look really good, but I don't want them to be so wild and crazy they don't fit in with my various builds. In addition, color is a big issue for me. I'm constantly taking apart graphics cards and repainting them to match whatever theme I have. But this silver, black, and gray design is gonna fit any theme I have, and with the RGB LED lighting, I'm gonna be able to actually click a button on the side of the card and change the light theme to match whatever color accent that my build has. These are features I have been asking for years, so I'm very happy to finally see them in a card. And it also has a couple cool tricks up its sleeve, which I wanna show you right now. Check this out. I have my screwdriver, and I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to twist it a little bit. I'm going to take out that screw, and look at that. The fan pops right out. Now, this is actually a pretty big deal. I know it looks like a gimmick, but guess what? People do replace their graphics cards because their fans fail. Now, if you're a power user, that's probably the time that you're gonna be liquid cooling or putting another heatsink on your cards. But the heatsink on here already performs extremely well, and so do the fans. So I find it really exciting that once these fans start to wear out, hopefully many years from now, I can just pop in a new set. Plus, it's just a cool idea. I mean, let's be honest here. Voila. Okay, enough of being sidetracked. The point of this video, after all, is not to review this card. I'm just excited about it. The point is to build a budget VR system and see if it actually can be done. Now, we could go on PC Parts Picker and pick out a bunch of PC parts, pickles. But actually, I would like to save even more money by using older hardware that I have around the office. So what do I have? For my power supply, I have an old 80 plus bronze power supply by Silverstone. It's a 450 watt power supply, which should be more than enough for this rig. For my platform, I have here a socket 1150 motherboard, and I just had to buy this on eBay because the name of the motherboard is the Elite Gaming Gank Edition Drone motherboard, which sound way too cool to pass up. So the processor is an i5. It has the Intel 6200 Iris Pro graphics, which are actually surprisingly decent. And the RAM is 8GB of some legacy Patriot memory. Old faithful stuff that I've had in my PC parts bin drawer and pull it out whenever I need to test something. Even though this is a budget rig, I don't like to skimp on storage. I happen to have a Samsung 840 drive. It's just laying down there in my parts bucket, so I'm gonna use that. If you're gonna be buying a new drive, maybe look at something from Samsung. This is a Samsung 850 EVO, and they're good drives. They are pretty darn quick, and their price to performance ratio is competitive. All right, so we have our budget parts picked out, and we're ready to start assembling them, but we're going to need to assemble them in a case. Keeping with my current theme, I want to use something that's laying around, and although I have a couple different choices, I think that this Silverstone SG05 is going to be perfect. Now, of course, it's a little bit dirty and maybe the paint's gone bad, but we can at least dress it up a little bit. Just because we're on a budget doesn't mean things can't look nice once it's all said and done. Now there goes a sight from my soul. There goes a sight from my soul. Well, normally we'd have to wait for the paint to dry to assemble all this stuff, but I already waited for the paint to dry. So let's just start putting it together. So this is a perfect example why I like to benchmark my components on a test bench, because if there's a problem, I don't have to rip everything apart. In this case, I did put it on the test bench, but everything looked really, really good. So I installed Windows, I was running some applications, but it started to have problems and eventually it would just hang on post indefinitely. I want to move on and actually do some VR stuff. So I've ripped out a super stable Intel Ivy Bridge motherboard from one of my video streaming boxes. I got a ton of them on the shelf, but I know this one's working and tested and it's gonna get me back into the action as soon as possible. So I'm gonna get everything buttoned up, and then I'm going to start playing with the VR goggles. Well, the paint turned out real nicely. It matches the silver and gunmetal gray of the Nitro series brand, but it's missing one thing: stickers. And I think each one of these adds 5 frame rates per second. I don't know until we benchmark it, but let's get them stuck. Okay, so I put the stickers on. It looks great, and hopefully I didn't jinx it and it's gonna perform as good as it looks. Maybe even better. I'm going to do an unboxing. I'm going to talk about my impressions, but this is no way a review because I am completely incompetent of reviewing something like this or anything really in general. There is a manual, hopefully. Quick start guide. Plug the goggles on your head and plug it into your computer. Power bricks and different wall adapters, but it's already set up for America. This is what I just opened. IR positional tracking kit. It's a cute little tripod. Foam on the edges in case I end up bumping myself too hard. Ooh, it's bendy, and I guess this is the majigger that screws into this. I have no idea what I'm doing. More stuff. All right, I skipped the unboxing because frankly, I'm incompetent at taking things out of a box and making it look interesting. And Josh! What? Do your job! I'm putting titles over it. All right, let's do a trial run of this and stick it on my head. Ah. Yeah, I'm gonna take off. I bet there's some adjustments that can be made here. My impressions are, now that I have everything fit on my head, they're actually fairly comfortable, although they are a little bit heavier than some other goggles I've used. At least they feel heavier. I can breathe at least through my mouth, and the lenses are pretty much touching my eyeballs, even at the farthest out setting, but of course I'll have to tweak that once I have them powered on so I can actually see what's going on. Getting everything hooked up was actually very simple and intuitive, and I didn't even need the quick start guide. Now, what I would have appreciated is a kickstart guide to get the goggles actually working with something. While there were fun-sized candy bar instructions scattered throughout the various official sources, there was absolutely nothing that from start to finish would help you get these goggles working. Now, to be fair, OSVR and the HDK2 goggles are for developers and power users who have some semblance of an idea what they're doing. So what all is involved? Well, first you need to update to the latest drivers for your video card. Then you have to install the Windows OSVR driver runtime package. You have to upgrade the IR camera firmware, then create the OSVR central shortcut. You need to install the OSVR control, then you need to go download Flip Runtime. You update the HDK2 firmware using the OSVR control and make sure that you're getting all the right versions and the little different parts and pieces working. Then you run the video tracking utility and get that all set up. You have to verify the OSVR server is up and running and the camera is tracking with some more utilities and some plugins. Finally, you install the Steam OSVR plugin. But actually, not finally, because there'll be some problems actually displaying virtual reality in Steam until you fix the orientation problem. Then you need to of course tweak resolution and the centering problems that pop up in Steam. And after you get done tweaking that, then you can begin the troubleshooting process. Now this list actually might not sound too bad, but keep in mind that every one of these steps requires you to get certain versions of certain software that's scattered throughout the entire web with no real instructions. So you don't really know exactly what you need when you get started. At least when I was doing this. But Lupo from Lupo Tech Tips, who is another YouTuber, has an excellent channel. He has separate videos for both NVIDIA and AMD users, and from start to finish he tells you what to do, where to get it, and what version to get. SteamVR seemed to be the lowest hanging fruit, plus I wanted to try out the flagship title, Elite Dangerous. After I got everything tuned in the Steam VR app, I launched Elite Dangerous and took a look around. Now, I have to say that I was pretty disappointed. Elite Dangerous was very highly hyped as far as being an amazing virtual reality experience. And although I think the game looks and sounds fantastic outside of VR, I was absolutely not impressed inside the game. I will say that it actually did work very fluently. Turning your head left and right actually allowed the pop-up menus to work. Now, this is just one guy's opinion, and frankly, it's probably not even a very good one. So feel free to ignore it. These are just my first impressions. Now, the next game I was actually very, very intrigued to try was Half-Life 2.
I think I'm going to be sick.
But I was still hopeful I could find some really cool VR-compatible games inside of Steam VR. I spent the evening downloading dozens of titles, but all of them pretty much had the same limitations of either Half-Life 2 or Elite Dangerous, and most of them were just demos, really. Nothing super interesting or even something that was long enough to be fun to play for a weekend. Just when I was about to give up, I found a demo that actually got me excited and rejuvenated for VR. This was the Gnomes and Goblins preview on Steam VR. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get very far because this experience was tuned for the HTC Vive or for something that actually had controllers, which I didn't have. But wow, it visually was stunning, it worked very well, and actually kind of sold the VR experience for me. More on that later though. Feeling re-energized and also intrigued, I decided to take the next step and to go find some experiences that were built for the goggles from the ground up. Now, unfortunately, even these were not plug and play. They might be for some users, but again, depending on how you had your goggles set up, they just wouldn't work. But after spending another day downloading different demos and getting them all to work and going through the installation process several more times, I was able to see what other people had come up with. Really though, nothing was meaningful. Yeah, there were some visually interesting demos, but...
Can I actually do anything, or am I just on rails?
That's what they were. They're just demos. I actually want to play some games in VR. The last leg of my journey was also by far the most time-consuming and frustrating. I wanted to get a AAA game that I actually would like to play working with my goggles and OSVR setup.
So if you want to play a game in VR, you're going to need a driver. And not only do you need a driver, you need an injection utility. Now, I just now learned maybe 4 hours ago that those two things are separate, that the driver is separate from the injection utility. I know that sounds obvious when I say it, but how it's presented, they just kind of assume that you know that. So I was trying to use the latest version of this driver / injection package, thinking that it would inject the latest driver into the game I'm trying to play right now, which is Far Cry 3. Well, it turns out that the drivers are completely unlinked from the packages, but they're also embedded in the packages. So I was trying to get to work with the latest version, 4.0, but apparently one of these earlier versions is what's going to support Far Cry 3 and have the Far Cry 3 drivers. Why it wouldn't have the latest drivers in the last one, I don't know. This is all completely above me. This is the kind of thing that if you are completely new to this and you have no idea how to approach it, that'd be really, really helpful to know. So that's why I'm telling you guys. If you guys already understand this, well, why are you watching this video anyways, other than to see me suffer?
And after spending a very long time, I became disheartened to find out that lots of the setups that were working for people on YouTube didn't work anymore because each driver had to be built specific for the patch of the game. And if the developers patched the game, it had to be rebuilt, which of course was time consuming, and many VR developers just didn't want to bother to write an entire new driver for it. Although I got really close to having some titles working, in absolutely no way would it be remotely playable, let alone enjoyable. Now, one thing I have learned is that it's impossible to benchmark this box for virtual reality. And the reason is there is no benchmark. Virtual reality isn't even in its infancy, really. It's not the moon desert it used to be for being able to download applications and demos and run on your goggles. We actually do have a good amount of demos to choose from and to run even on the OSVR goggles. Now, good news if you're an Oculus Rift or an HTC Vive customer, because there are lots of third parties that are making drivers so you can inject them into your favorite game and enjoy it in VR. As far as third-party support, it's still super hit or miss. There's still a lot of hacking and tweaking that you need to do, but it's great to see that it's there. Now, for the OSVR goggles, that's not so much. It is really still a desert. I want to be clear here. In no way am I dissing what Razer has done with either these goggles or their OSVR platform. It's open source. It's going to encourage developers to start making more cool demos and games, to get the user base excited, to give incentive to developers to actually develop AAA full-fledged titles. The hardware itself, it's very good. On paper, it matches up with the HTC Vive and Oculus Rift very nicely. And in practice, it's built very well, and it has a pretty decent resolution. I don't have the latest models of the Rift or the Vive to play with, so I can't do a direct comparison. But I would say that in some of the demos I played, this thing can really pop. It doesn't feel like a hacker type of testing equipment. It actually feels like it could be a real product. It just needs to be made easier to use for stupid people like myself. Now, every game that I did run and demo that I ran flawlessly, sometimes well above the 75 frame rates per second on my budget box. Now, I could just cut it right here and say that this box was a success, but that would be doing myself a huge disservice, as well as anybody who cares that's watching, because I haven't discovered really anything. Now, in light of everything I just said, it turns out that I failed at benchmarking this budget box and this R9 480, but I don't want to leave it here. Okay, so here is my plan. I am going to test both these systems side by side on that workbench over there. What I'm going to test for is the difference between them in visual fidelity in the real world. Both of these boxes have to hit a minimum target frame rate of 75 FPS. And the reason for that is that that provides the best visual experience and prevents motion sickness for these goggles. This system right here is of course much more expensive and should be much more powerful. It features an i7 6700K, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and a Samsung VNAND flash drive, which is the 950 EVO Pro. And over on this side, we have the Ivy Bridge i5 with 8 gigabytes of RAM, it's just DDR3, and a Samsung 840. Both these systems right here, of course, have an R9 480 card. I actually went to Amazon, I purchased this ASAP so I could do this test. My hypothesis is that both these systems are going to be very close in presenting the same visual fidelity at similar target frame rates. Now, is this system going to be a little bit faster? Is it going to have more stuff turned up? Yes, I think so. But is it going to be a noticeable difference from this box? If this system can hit 75 frame rates per second and come close visually to this system right here, then this is going to be a big win for my budget box. Because after all, VR is expensive when there's only a couple VR games compatible with your goggles. So it was a long night, but I have my results. As expected, our 6700K system beat out our Nitro box in a lot of the synthetics, especially in FutureMark where it dominated it. It's really important to run multiple benchmarks and not to take the final score of any synthetic at face value. Now, the reason FutureMark dominated our Nitro box so heavily was because of the CPU score. Obviously, the 6700K has newer features enabled on it and has a much higher clock speed than the 3550. But when we're looking at the GPU score, we notice that they're not too far apart, which shows that our i5 3550, even though it might be a little bit long in the tooth, is not bottlenecking our 480 too awfully much. My other favorite synthetic is Valley. I really like Valley because it's a good hybrid between a repeatable benchmark, a synthetic, and it really does behave and act like an actual game. Now, my goal was to get as close to average of 75 frame rates per second and see what settings that would take in Valley, and then compare the delta between our 6700K system. I was able to set a custom resolution of 2160 by 1200, which is the resolution of these goggles. Then I changed the output to stereoscopic 3D and then side-by-side mode. Side-by-side mode gives the best analog I feel for this headset. I ran the benchmark over and over again with different settings until I was able to find the settings that gave the best experience on this box emulated for these goggles. Once I had those settings, I ran it on the 6700K system to see what the difference is. As expected, it was much higher, but what was important was the minimum frame rate number. Now, if the minimum frame rate number was crazy different, then it would make a harder justification for this older processor. But it wasn't. Our minimum frame rate was close to our target frame rate, and our average was spot on. Pretty good for a box that costs less than half of our benchmark system. Now, it's a great thing that the 480 and our little box here work so well together for VR experiences right now because of the low cost. If you want to shell out money for the Vive or the Rift, you're going to be glad that you saved a lot of money by building this box instead of that 6700K system that we did. So this is just my first adventure testing VR in my office and comparing hardware. I'm going to have to do this over and over and over again as this technology rapidly matures. But I can say that I did have fun, although I was stressed a couple times trying to figure it out. Thank you for watching, and I want to thank Sapphire and Razer for helping me out get a pair of these goggles and for allowing me to test them and say to you my thoughts unfettered.